Good evening. This is the last session of the day. It's been a long day, so I have a question for you. What is it that powers the sun? Hydrogen fusion. What is hydrogen fusion? What does the hydrogen fuse into? Helium. Okay, now how many protons are in a helium nucleus? 2. And how many neutrons are in a helium nucleus usually? Oh, yeah, somebody's out there having a party. Usually 2. That's all right. So how do we get hydrogen, which has how many protons in its nucleus? 1. How do we get hydrogen to fuse into helium? What do 2 protons do to each other? They repel each other. And the force of the repulsion is proportional to the inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. So every time you cut the distance in half, the force between them quadruples. So how do you get these protons to stick? Now it turns out there's another force called the strong nuclear force, and it is 100 times more powerful than the electrostatic repulsion, but it has a range limit. It only works if you're within 10 to the minus 13th centimeter. So somehow you have to get the 2 protons to within 10 to the minus 13th centimeter. But the force between the 2 protons by that time is inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. So 10 to the minus 13th would make it 10 to the 26th. Somethings. The force between the 2 protons and 10 to the 26th somethings. And it doesn't much matter what those things are if there are 10 to the 26th of them. In order to get 2 protons to within 10 to the minus 13th centimeter of each other, where they can react, you have to use a force that is equivalent to the weight of a small insect. Which, if you think about it, is a hell of a lot of weight in comparison to a proton. And the only place where that kind of force exists is in the core of a star, where the temperatures are 15 million degrees Kelvin and the pressures don't bear thinking about. And there, inside the core of a star, a few protons will fuse. And that fusion will produce enough energy for the core of the star to push back on the gravity that's trying to collapse the star. And the whole system will sit there in dynamic equilibrium, trying to contract by gravity, trying to expand by heat, unable to do either, and furiously burning fuel. There is enough hydrogen in the core of the sun to keep that going for 12 billion years, of which we've used up about 5, maybe 6. So we don't have to worry yet. Of course, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about Agile and Scrum and the land that Scrum forgot. That's the title of this talk, The Land That Scrum Forgot. This talk is going to be a history lesson. We're going to go back in time and talk about the days before Agile and how Agile got started and how Scrum got started and all the glory days that happened after that, and then the disaster, the horrors that occurred later, and the terrible wars and the battles that were fought, and where we are now. This is Norway, but do you ever get American sitcoms? Does anybody remember a sitcom called Barney Miller? Barney Miller was an interesting sitcom. It was a New York police department. They were detectives, although they never seemed to work on crimes or anything. They were always just in the office talking to each other. And one of the detectives was a Japanese gentleman. The actor's name was Jack Sue. I don't remember the name of the character. And one day he was making some lunch. And other people would come by and say, "Oh my God, that reeks. That smells." He said, "What are you talking about? This is a delicacy, a Japanese delicacy." No, this reeks. It smells. Turn it off." And he'd say, "No, you don't understand. This is something my mother would prepare. It's wonderful." And people would walk away in disgust. And one guy came up and he sniffed it and he says, "That smells like garbage." And he walked away. And the Japanese guy said, "What do you mean garbage? It's fish heads and carrot greens and lettuce hearts." Then he said, "Come to think of it, that is garbage." And then a little while later, he says, try this, it's wonderful." And one of the guys who was holding his nose the whole time, finally in desperation, stuck a spoon in and he tasted it and he said, "Oh, that's not bad." And he walked away. And the Japanese guy was very happy. And he goes and he gets a spoon and he sticks it in there and he tastes it. Oh, God, what happened? What happened to Agile? I mean, it started out great. It started out glorious. It started out wonderful. What happened? Is it really that bad? Well, let's talk about it. 1999. At the time, the world was dominated by waterfall. There had been a few papers about strange things called Scrum. There had been a paper in 1995 by Ken Schwaber and a few other guys about Scrum, and it caught a little bit of attention, but not very much. And Kent Beck had begun writing about this thing called extreme programming. Anybody remember what that was? Extreme programming. And most people thought, "Oh, extreme programming, what the devil is that? Oh, that's where people sit and they program together. And they write tests. We're not going to do that. Besides, it's extreme." This was 1999, but the industry started to pay attention to Beck and extreme programming, and there was more discussion of it and more talk, and suddenly the conferences started to get dominated by this topic. I remember going to any software conference at all, didn't matter what it was. There would be a talk on extreme programming somewhere in that conference. It was a remarkable day, and bit by bit the momentum began to build, and people thought, "Yes, this is what we need. We need this small process, whatever it is. It's extreme, it's wonderful, it's about code, lovely." Kent had a vision. The vision that Kent had, as he explained it, was to heal the damage between business and development. That's an interesting goal for something called extreme programming, isn't it? To heal the divide between business and development. His vision was that with just the right disciplines and just the right minimal process, trust could develop between developers and business. The business would begin to trust the developers instead of thinking they were lazy, venal, nasty creatures. And the developers would begin to look at the business people and realize that they were reasonable, rational beings, not from some other planet. That was Kent's vision. And I caught that vision. It meant a lot to me. This is 1999, and I thought, yes, I think this is what we need. We need a process that's not waterfall. That's not some big, horrible process administered by bureaucrats, but a process that is controlled and designed by developers for developers and business. A process that focuses on business value, but also focuses on code quality. The things that mean the most to both factions, and a process that fosters communication, massive amounts of communication between development and business. This is what we need. And Kent Beck and I came up with a scheme. We came up with a scheme to teach people about extreme programming. We called the scheme XP Immersion. And we held a number of these things. These were open events. We charged for them. We made a fair bit of money on the deal, as a matter of fact, which was part of the issue. We liked making money on things. So we held these lovely classes. People came to them. They came to them in droves. I rented a big office and had lots and lots of people coming to this office. About once a quarter, we would have a massive XP immersion. 50, 60, 70 people would come. We set up tables so that they could pair program together. Triangular tables with 2 people on each each edge of the table. So we could have teams of 6 sitting at these lovely triangular tables with monitors set up in the middle, all facing outwards. Right? So you could have pair programming going on. We'd have this room full of people writing code, writing tests. We had customers coming and they would write down stories, and the programmers would get the stories to pass, and we'd go through several iterations, and everybody would leave very happy. We did, I'd say, 8 or 9 of these, if I remember correctly. The last one was held on September 11th, 2001. In the year 2000, Kent Beck held a meeting. The meeting was a meeting of all the XP leaders, whoever these people were. So it was me and Kent and Ron Jeffries and Martin Fowler and Ken Auer and a bunch of guys who had been there at the beginning. He called it the XP Leadership Meeting. And in this meeting, I don't know quite what his goal was. It was just kind of to get everybody together. But in the meeting, something very bizarre happened. A number of these people, who are the XP leaders, had been the leaders of the design patterns movement. Who knows what design patterns are? Yes, okay, so the design patterns movement was begun by many of these guys. Kent Beck, Ward Cunningham, Ron Jeffries, same guys. And when there was talk of forming an organization in this XP leadership meeting, the patterns guys went, nope, we don't want any part of it. We tried that once with the Hillside group. We don't want to do it anymore. And they balked. They said no. But a few of us had not been part of the design patterns movement, not the inner circle. And we thought, well, no, we think it's a good idea. And in particular, Martin Fowler and I sat down and said, we should form an organization. We need to get not just the extreme programming people together. We need to get the Scrum people together. We need to get the DSDM people together. We need to get Pete Codes guys in there who are doing FDD. All these lightweight processes. We called this the Lightweight Process Summit. And Martin and I sat down and wrote an invitation list with a whole bunch of people that we thought should be at this meeting. And we sent out emails to this batch of people, and by golly, if we didn't start getting people saying, yeah, they wanted to come to it. Ken Schwaber wanted to come to it, and Steve Meller wanted to come to it. A whole bunch of guys who are involved in lightweight processes. Jim Highsmith, Alistair Coburn, lots of folks wanted to come to this meeting. We held the meeting in Snowbird in Salt Lake City at the ski resort above Salt Lake City in February of 2001. It was at that meeting we coined the term Agile. We had a debate. What should we call this thing? This thing that's kind of like extreme programming, kind of like Scrum, kind of like FDD, kind of like DSDM. What should we call it? And we debated it back and forth, around, and eventually someone said Agile, and we all hated the word. Terrible word. Well, can you think of anything better? No. Well, I guess we'll call it Agile. All right, so we called it Agile, and then it was Ward Cunningham, I believe. Who knows who Ward Cunningham is? All right, those of you who don't, do you know what a wiki is? Yes, he invented wikis. Do you know what CRC cards are? He invented CRC cards. Do you know what FIT is? The testing framework FIT. He invented that. Do you know what design patterns are? He was in at the beginning of that. Do you know what test-driven development is? He was at the beginning of that. If you take any thread in our industry and start to pull at it, you pull at it long enough, you will find Ward Cunningham sitting in the back there, tossing an idea out, and someone else will have run with it. Ward, I believe it was Ward who said, what we need here is a few statements where we don't disparage the old way of working. We say that we value the old way of working, but we value these other things more. And the Agile Manifesto was born in that meeting. We coined all 4 of those statements. Who's read the Agile Manifesto? Okay, so that's where that happened. We coined all that topic in there. Those 4 statements took us a while. But we left that meeting having accomplished something, which is very rare for a meeting to do. Most meetings accomplished nothing except a horrible waste of time. But we actually left that meeting with an accomplishment. Now, we had no idea what accomplishment it would be. At that meeting, Kent Beck reiterated his mission, his vision. He said again, this agile thing, if we're going to call it agile, it should be to heal the divide between business and development. And we all agreed, yes, that's what it's for. Ward went home. He put up the Agile Manifesto website. He invited people to sign it. We were stunned when thousands upon thousands of people began to sign this document that was sitting on the web. It was a runaway explosion. None of us expected to happen. Signature after signature after signature piling up on this website. We knew that something was going on. So we decided to form an organization, the Agile Alliance. We banded together, the same people who went to Snowbird. We banded together. We formed this organization. We got Mary Poppendick involved. She did all the work to create the nonprofit stuff. Horrible bunch of bureaucracy to get that done. And we formed an organization. I was the first chairman of this organization, the Agile Alliance. And for the period where I was the chairman, we did absolutely nothing, because all we did was meet and do nothing, which was fine with me because I had a business to run. I think the next chairman was Ken Schwaber, and about a year later. And Ken decided that he wanted to do something else. He wanted to somehow make the Alliance a revenue-generating machine, some way to make money. And his idea was to do a conference. But I wasn't too interested in that because I already had a conference. We had started a conference called XP Universe. And XP Universe was very popular. We'd have lots and lots of people coming to this conference. We did it once a year. And we'd have people coming to XP Universe, 200, 400, 600 people. It was very good. And we thought this is good for the community. Meanwhile, the Agile Alliance started its own conference called the Agile something conference. I can't remember. And, you'd go to one conference and you'd see the same people in the same talks. And you'd go to the other conference, you'd see the same people in the same talks. And one of my customers came up to me and he said, "Bob, this is stupid." Now, when your customer comes to you and says, "This is stupid," you listen to this. And I listened to that, and I thought, you're right. And so I sat down with Ken Schwaber, and I said, "Ken, I will either buy the Agile conference from you, or you can buy XP Universe from me. One way or the other, it's going to become joint." And he said, "You know what? I will buy it from you." And I said, "That's fine, because I don't need a conference when I'm running my business." And so the sale was accomplished. The Agile Conference was born from that sale. Ken came to me sometime later. He said, "Bob, I've got this idea. I'm going to run a class which I call Certified Scrum Master class." I said, "What?" "Yeah, Certified Scrum." I thought this was the dumbest idea I'd ever heard. He said, "I'd like to use one of your classrooms. I happen to have that nice big space where I was doing XP immersions. I'd like to use one of your classrooms to do the first one." I said, "Sure, go ahead. Go ahead. But Ken, I got to tell you, this is a dumb idea." There's a sign in a military store that I saw once. "A dumb idea that works is not a dumb idea." It worked. He started getting people to come to these courses. He started charging for the courses. More and more people came. The more he charged, the more people came. Started giving out these certificates. Hey, this is kind of cool, this certified Scrum thing. Started building a little organization off to the side. The Scrum Alliance popped up out of that. Lots of money going in that direction. Lots of money going in the Agile direction. Lovely thing to happen. Who do you think was taking these courses, these certified Scrum Master courses? Was it developers? No. See, I was a developer, and I thought it was stupid. And all the other developers I talked to said, this is stupid. Who was it that didn't think it was stupid? Project managers. Oh, no, that's not stupid at all. We've done that for years. We've got the PMBOK and the PMBOK and the BOK, and we got all these BOKs, and we need another BOK. So we're going to have the Scrum BOK. And we need certification for the Scrum BOK. So these guys, these project managers, started to line up for the Certified Scrum Master course. And it was the amount of money that was gathered from people over that is truly astounding. And by the way, it had the effect of legitimizing Agile. Without that Certified Scrum Master course, Agile would be nowhere today. It would still be this little thing off to the side that a few developers thought was cool. Instead, it crossed the chasm. It's now the thing. Everybody's doing Scrum, everybody's doing Agile because of this really dumb thing that Ken Schwaber did. But the problem was that it was not developers who were taking the Certified Scrum Master course. It was project managers. Now, before we go on, I should describe what a Scrum Master is, or was, when initially we were doing this. A Scrum Master was a coach. A Scrum Master was not a manager, explicitly not a manager, not supposed to be a manager. The Scrum Master was responsible for defending the process, but nothing else. He did not defend the schedule, he did not defend the budget, he did not defend the stories, he did not defend the backlog. He only defended the process, he or she, and the role was supposed to rotate through the various team members. It was just supposed to be something that, this sprint, you should be the Scrum Master. And frankly, the idea of the role was to slowly kind of fade away, so that in the end you wouldn't need a Scrum Master. That was the initial concept. I don't think that the project managers who took the Certified Scrum Master course liked that particular interpretation. I think they wanted to be Scrum Masters. I'm a Scrum Master. So, it turned out that businesses got the idea that the critical element in making a Scrum team successful was to pick the right Scrum Master. Notice how similar that sounds to pick the right project manager. It maps very nicely. And the Scrum Master who did a really, really good job could stand at the end of the project and say, my team succeeded. That was never supposed to be the way. Never. But my team succeeded, and who would get the glory and the credit for the success? The team would stand behind the glorious Scrum Master. That was not supposed to be the way. And do you think that helps to heal the divide between development and business? No. No, it helps to worsen the separation between business and development. Scrum makes you go fast. Oh, and it does too. So does any Agile method, right? Because what are you doing? Well, every couple of weeks you're delivering something. Can you imagine how foreign that was in 1999? Every week or two you are going to deliver working software. What? What? We haven't delivered working software for a year. What? Yes, every 2 weeks, working software. It's going to work. Every time you publish it, it will work. You will publish it every 2 weeks. You don't have to deploy it, but it's got to work. People started getting stuff done very, very fast. Scrum teams, when you tell them deliver every 2 weeks, they will deliver every 2 weeks. They won't deliver everything they promised, but they will deliver something, and they will start to spin, and stuff will get done. They can move very, very fast at first. But something happens. What was it that was not taught in the Certified Scrum Master course? Practices. What practices? software development practices. All that stuff that was in extreme programming initially, all that stuff about pair programming, simple design, refactoring, test-driven development, that was all in there for a reason. Because when you are going fast, and you can go fast, when you are going fast, you need something that keeps you clean. You need something that keeps the code from rotting. How many developers do we have in the room? How many of you have been significantly slowed down by bad code generated by a Scrum team going too fast? When you go fast and you are focusing on getting stories done and stories done and stories done and stories done, the code can rot just as fast as you are moving. And so what happens after a year is the rate begins to slow. Not because you're working less hard. You're putting in a hell of a lot of effort. It's just that you cannot force the code to accept the next new feature. And every time you go around the loop, it gets harder and harder. This is Norway. I don't know if you know what a tractor pull is. You do? Tractor is a wonderful thing, a tractor pull. You've got a big honking tractor, and you put this sled behind it with a weight. And the weight continues, as the tractor moves forward, the weight continues to move forward until it's sitting right on top of the skid. And no tractor can pull this thing at the end, but at first, it's really easy to pull until that weight starts to move. And the tractor that manages to pull this thing the farthest wins. Scrum, without technical practices, becomes a tractor pull. Every sprint gets harder and harder and harder to make progress because the code is getting worse and worse and worse. This became so prevalent in the Scrum world that Martin Fowler actually coined a term for it. Does anybody know what that term was? Flaccid Scrum. Flaccid. You know the term flaccid? There came in the conferences and outside of the conferences an us versus them attitude. And by us versus them, I meant developers versus project managers. When you went to an Agile conference, there would be 90 talks about different project management techniques and no talks about development techniques, or one or two. There was a huge bias in favor of the project management techniques and very little of the development techniques. And the developers who had spawned this process now felt left out. They felt disenfranchised. They started thinking, well, this has gone off to a bunch of guys who are getting pieces of paper for spending a lot of money to go to a 3-day class, and the rest of us who have been busting our butts making these Scrum projects work are getting jack out of it. Kent's vision had failed. The divide between business and development had reopened. And it had reopened right in our midst, right in the midst of the Agile community itself, manifested by the Agile conference. Kent's vision of a healing of that divide had been torn apart. Yep, did all that? Yep. What happens to a Scrum team as it begins to slow down? Velocity starts to go down. What happens to that Scrum team? Well, they never probably had the practices because most Scrum teams weren't taught any technical practices. They just thought they were going to go around this loop real fast. So they start to slow down, and they're working really hard, but they can't get as much stuff done anymore, and they're harder and harder working, and they can't get this stuff anymore. What does the business do? What does the Scrum Master do? Guys, you got to keep your velocity up. Guys, You got to keep getting stories done. Guys, we're letting the business down. Notice this pile of guilt that starts to grow on top of the developers. This weight of responsibility. And notice who is not bearing it. The Scrum Master who is saying to the guys, we got to go faster, is actually saying, guys, you got to go faster. The pressure builds. The team starts to falter. There are factions that grow in the team, and people start to leave in disgust, and that just isn't working. And eventually, if that's allowed to continue, the entire agile structure will fall apart. The team will go back to doing waterfall, because at least in waterfall, you'd have these long periods of time where you could rest. What Scrum forgot was that you cannot have speed without quality. You cannot have speed without technical quality. You cannot have speed while you are carrying technical debt. And the more technical debt you carry, the slower you will go. And this is a horrible, wicked circle, because the slower you go, the more technical debt you incur. So like the tractor pull, every step gets harder and harder and harder because the technical debt grows and slows you down with every iteration. Because of this, another movement was born. The software craftsmanship movement. Who has seen this movement? And who has seen the software craftsmanship manifesto, the page? Who signed it? There are several of you. Very good. But I want you to notice that that is an evidence of a split. A split in the community, a fracture. A group of us felt that it was necessary to reassert the values of extreme programming into this world that was now dominated by project manager, Scrum Master, Scrum. We hope that that is a reawakening of Kent's vision. I'm not sure there's any evidence to that effect at this point. Still, we are going around the certified Scrum Master loop. Still, we are seeing Scrum projects that are fast for a while and then slow down and spiral out of control. How many of you are doing test-driven development? Notice although it's much more than we're doing it last year, so few. How many of you are doing Scrum? Yes. Well, yes, how many are saying you're doing Scrum but actually not? How many are saying you're doing test-driven development but really not? Still, the number is staggering. Many people doing Scrum, few people doing test-driven development. Flaccid Scrum. The death spiral. We've known for a very long time that you cannot go fast without keeping code quality high. We have known for a very long time that you cannot go fast without keeping design and architecture clean. And yet we do not do it. Why don't we do it? Because we feel somehow that this last iteration, I can make a mess and go a little bit faster. No, you can't. No, you can't. You cannot go faster by making a mess. You cannot go faster by avoiding writing tests. You cannot go faster by rushing. We will one day learn this, I'm sure. We know it already because we live with the results of it all the time. And yet, we go back to our jobs and we write the next mess. If you want to go fast, stay clean. And this is what Scrum needs to do if Scrum is going to survive, if Agile is going to survive, is to remember its roots. It was a set of technical practices conjoined with a set of management practices. The two were bound together inextricably. You could not separate them, and yet the separation was done. So here we are. Is the software craftsmanship movement going to heal the divide? Is it going to force the rejoining of agile methods with good technical practices? I don't know the answer to that. I wish I did, but I don't. It may be that we are going to head back into another 20 years of a big divide between business and development. If that happens, that'll be a shame. Because we did have, at one point, a reasonable chance of healing that divide, of creating business and a partnership between business and development that was beneficial to both sides, instead of this constant tension. Are there any questions? Yes. Could executable specifications with craftsmanship help us? Was that your question? Of course it could. I mean, we know how to do this. We know how to do agile development. We know what the technical practices are. We know what the tools are. As executable specifications are and always have been an intrinsic part of agile development. From the very first XP Immersion we taught people, first you write your functional tests, then you write your unit tests, then you write your code. And functional tests were executable specifications. We've gotten much better at it now. We have great tools for doing it. How many of you are using Cucumber? How many of you are using Fitness? Well, what are you using? Okay, wait. I know. How many of you have armies of QA people running manual tests? Yeah, all right. So, let me make a point about that. Manual testing is immoral. It is not just dumb, and it is dumb. It is immoral because you are taking people and asking them to act like machines. Manual testing is usually a big document of test cases that the poor manual tester has to sit there and go, oh, okay, enter B9572 into the username field. Enter K9872 into the password field. Click login. Did the welcome screen come up? Check here. And this is your job. That's immoral. A machine could do that. Now, I have a client who has 80,000 such tests. They run a large travel website. 80,000 tests, just like that one. Manual test where some guy is going to poke at their website. They ship these 80,000 tests to India every 6 weeks. Costs them $1 million every time they do. And they have just been told, their QA department has just been told that they must cut their budget in half. The QA manager came to me and said, which half of these tests should I not run? I told him it didn't matter. You're not going to know if half your system works. That's what happens to manual tests. You're doing manual tests now. You watch what happens. They will grow and grow and grow until they become a line item on the budget that the CFO can point at and say, what the hell is that $6 million a year thing? Kill the tests. You watch that happen. So not only is it immoral from a human point of view, it is immoral from a business point of view because you are creating a structure that will inevitably kill itself. And by the way, what does it take to automate these tests? Not much. It's not hard to automate tests. It's not hard to write executable specifications. Takes a little bit of effort, but not an awful lot. Doesn't cost anywhere near as much as paying that army of guys, even if they're in India. Right? Much cheaper to write a suite of automated tests that tests your system. But you ask the question, is that going to do it for us? Well, I don't know. Because we're not doing it. We're not doing test-driven development. We're not doing executable specifications. Anybody else got a question? Yeah. Okay, so let's make a point about automating the UI. Automated testing of the UI. Is it a good idea to test your system through the UI? No. It is not a good idea to test your system through the UI. What should you test through the UI? The UI. Now, this is called, this is called decoupling. You decouple the user interface from the business rules. You do not test business rules through the user interface. You test the user interface through the user interface, and when you do, you cut all the business rules off. So when you're running your tests against the UI, there are no business rules there. You've stubbed them all out. And when you run your tests over the business rules, you don't have the UI there. The UI is gone. You're running the business rules, testing the business rules through an API. Why? What happens to tests that are run through the UI? You don't know what went wrong when it fails. It's very hard to find out, although some of the tools are pretty good at reporting it. Something much more tragic happens. UIs, are they meant to be fiddled with? Do you fiddle with your UI? Oh, let's change that font. Should we change that font? Let's change that font. Oh, let's make it green. Oh, move it over here. You know, this page has got too much stuff in it. Let's split those two pages in half. You do that kind of stuff? Of course you do. It's a UI. You're supposed to be able to change it. When you run your tests through the UI, you can't change the UI anymore, because 1,000 tests will break. What do you mean you made that font green instead of red? 1,000 tests just broke. Turn it back to red. I have a client who ran 15,000 automated tests through his UI. Every time anybody touched the UI, 1,000 of those tests broke. He came up with a real simple rule. Nobody touches the UI. Huh? You want to keep your UI so you can't touch it? Test your system through it. No. We do not test through the UI. We test under the API, under the UI, through an API. And this all takes design. It takes thought. It takes an attention to detail. We need to design our systems so that we can test them without the UI present. We need to be able to test our UI without the system present, without the business rules present. You asked me a very specific question. Which UI tester do I use? The UI tester that I use are my eyes. That's because I don't write big systems. I write smallish systems. So when I get right down to the UI, I don't test it anymore. I just make sure that it looks right. For larger systems, there are some very nice UI testers out there. There are some that are free, like Selenium and Water. And there are some that you can pay an awful lot of money for, like Quick Test Pro or Silk or some of those others. My advice to you would be to start with the ones that are free and then see if you need a bigger one later on. But it's much easier to test a UI with a little free thing at first. Oh, and avoid at all costs UI testers that are record playback testers, that watch you operate the system and then play your operations back to see if they're the same. They aren't actually testing anything except you. Next question, if any. Yes? Integration tests I usually do with a tool like Fitness or Cucumber or something like that, an API testing tool, where I will take the components of the system, separate out the UI from them, and then I will write tests that pump inputs into the top of the components, take results out of the bottom of the components, and make sure those results work well. I do that at the component level. So I can write a series of tests for each component. Then I will write a few tests for the assembly of a few components. So I'll take a few components and wire them together, and then I will run a few tests through that assembly of components and look at some of the results out the bottom. I am not testing the components at that point. I am testing whether they are wired together correctly. In the end, I will put the whole system together and I will pump inputs in through the UI, and I will look at outputs out through the UI. And those are some UI tests that run all the way through the system, but there are very few of them, because their goal is simply to plumb out the system, make sure the wiring is correct. All the business rules have been tested elsewhere. So I will have a very small number of tests that go all the way through the system. Next. I believe then, if there are no more questions, I am done. Thank you for your attention. There's a little batch of green cards out there. You want to put them in the bucket. The red ones and yellow ones are for other people.